My name is Dan Finucane, and I'm currently a regent. I love folk music, blues music, and I love singing and playing with other people.
My name is Ian Peoples. I'm a Jesuit regent. I'm kind of a football fanatic. Most of my weekends are spent watching at least a few games. I'm probably one of the biggest Lionel Messi fans.
Hello and welcome back to MagisTalk. I'm your host, Dan Finucane, and you'll notice that I'm not joined by my co-host, Ian Peoples. He is away in New York City for a meeting, but he'll be back for our next episode. I am, however, joined by a very special guest, Dr. Annie Phoenix. Annie is here in Belize as part of the Ignatian Colleagues Program, which is a group of faculty and staff at Jesuit universities in the U.S. and here in Belize, who are learning more about the Jesuit mission and higher education. And so we've invited Annie to the show today to talk a little bit, or maybe a lot actually, about an issue that her and I and Ian are passionate about, basically dedicating your life to accompanying and working to support and help liberate, really, men and women who are incarcerated. Annie is currently the executive director of the Jesuit Social Research Institute at Loyola University in New Orleans. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her work. So Annie, thank you for being here in the midst of your busy touring schedule of Belize. We're glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and we'll hear more later about what you've been seeing here in Belize, but just general impressions, like how's it been so far?
I love it. I really love it. It reminds me of New Orleans in some odd ways, which is unexpected. The food is great. The people are very kind and welcoming. And I'm loving it. I feel really grateful to be here.
Good. Well, we're glad that you're here, and one of the parallels, of course, with New Orleans is rice and beans. And we've actually asked Father Tom Green, who was here a few weeks ago, which rice and beans he preferred, and he answered Belize. And he's from New Orleans originally, so I don't know who he made angry back home about that. But
ouch.
We won't put you on the spot on that unless you really want to answer that.
I mean, I think it's very fresh here, and we've been going to all these places, and people have been making over an open fire and it's just with the coconut. I think the coconut puts it just a step above.
Wow. Okay, so that's 2 for Belize and 0 for New Orleans. So.
Ouch. We've got other gifts. You know?
That's right. Exactly. There's other food in New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Annie, we like to start our episodes by asking our guests a little bit about your faith journey. Where have you been? How has faith played a role in your life up till now?
Yeah. So I think my faith journey is different than many people. I was not raised religious at all. Both of my parents were raised Catholic and then chose as adults to not have much connection to their religion, and decided that if I wanted to be religious, that would be my own choice later in life that I would get to make. I was sharing with somebody on this trip that the only time I went to church growing up is when a crisis was happening. If something really bad was going on, my mom would drive to church and we would go into church and pray. And that's the only time I ever really had any connection to religion. So I always knew kind of that it was the place you go when things are bad. And then I moved to New Orleans, which is such a Catholic city. And I was teaching second grade. And the way to get the parent, to build relationships in the community was to go to church. And so I started going to church when I was teaching. And I actually became the godmother of one of my students and his sister, who was in my class after he had graduated from second grade. And I started going to church with them. And I was really, really enjoyed that. And then in order for them to be baptized, I felt like I should get baptized first. So I went through catechism classes in my early 20s and got baptized. And, now it's been 11 or 12 years that I've been going to church really consistently. And it's been really important to my life. And the more I like to say, like, I didn't grow up with any religious baggage, so that was a gift from my parents. Like, I had no negative relationship to religion. So I got to kind of go in with fresh, open eyes and really, find out what that meant for me in my life, which was great.
Yeah. And it clearly, I think, has had an impact on your trajectory, like what you've done since that time. Was the school that you were working at, was that a Catholic school?
No, it was a public school, but everybody went to church, and it's like, it's the easy, our parents were working and busy, and so it's hard to get people to come during the day or after school hours to talk about how their kid's doing. Even parent-teacher conferences were a challenge to schedule. But on Sunday, if you hit people after service, they're in a good receptive position to talk about how their kids are doing and, whatever. And then I got to know multi-generations of a family, right?
Sure.
And so then the grandmothers used to come and help in my classroom. And so it became a much more integrated, it was nice. It was a really good way to get to know the community.
Yeah. Well, and New Orleans is such a Catholic city, very similar in many ways to Belize, being a very Catholic place. So it sounds like the culture was such that Sundays, that's where you're going to go.
Yeah. And it, for me, it was how I found a lot of my community, because I'm not from New Orleans, I'm from California. And so I was moving to a place that I didn't know anybody. And so it just kind of grounded me.
Sure.
And I found lots of ways to engage over the years. Now we've got a social justice committee, and I'm doing that, and it's fun to, when you move to a place in your early 20s and you don't know anyone, you don't have any family there, it's hard to connect with people of other generations too.
Yes.
Right? And so at church, it's I feel like I have aunties, moms, people who are of an older generation who check on me and be how are you doing? How are you eating? Maybe I should teach you how to cook, things like that are just really kind.
Sure.
So it's been a great way to feel grounded in my community.
Yeah. Well, maybe tell us a little bit about how you got from teaching second grade to then doing work with men and women who are incarcerated. I guess specifically women. That's kind of where you started. So what got you involved?
So the story actually starts before I taught second grade. When I was in college, I went to Scripps College in California. I was feeling pretty lost in college, and I went to this really nice college. And a lot of people I grew up with didn't go to college, and people around me were from very wealthy families, and I struggled. And I had a professor that said maybe you need something to care about, maybe you need a purpose. And she connected me with this program, and I started teaching in a juvenile hall when I was 19 years old. So only a couple years older than the kids in the juvenile hall. So really they were my peers, So I was teaching writing workshops and poetry in this juvenile hall. And then I got involved in working in the women's prison, and that felt even more close because there are women in that prison who are from my community in California. More women in the prison from my community in California than there were on that campus. And so that was really impactful. And I knew I wanted to teach, so I ended up doing Teach for America, and they placed me in New Orleans teaching second grade.
Okay. So
that's how I got there. And then, a lot of the families I was working with were impacted by the prison system. I taught for 4 years. I taught middle school, and they were arresting kids out of my classroom, the campus police officer. And so it just kept hitting me in the face that this is, and being a teacher, you don't have a lot of power to change systems. Yeah. So I applied to a PhD program, which I didn't think I was going to get into. And because I didn't have a master's degree, I just was let's see, and got in. And I did my PhD in sociology at Tulane University with the purpose of getting back into working in prisons. And so kind of sought out those opportunities, ended up founding a nonprofit organization with Sarita Steib called Operation Restoration that focused on women who'd been incarcerated. We started a college program in the women's prison, and I also focused a lot on policy work and grew that as I was getting my PhD, and finished my the same year, finished my PhD, had a baby, and left the organization, and they were in the best position they'd been in, very stable, they're doing great, and looked for where God was calling me, and this job was it. I had an opportunity to work in prisons, to do research, and to contribute in the ways that I wanted to.
Yeah, and this job meaning?
So being the executive director of the Jesuit Social Research Institute, because Loyola New Orleans was in a place where they wanted to start a prison education program. So I got I think it's a unique opportunity to be able to do something like that twice. So I'd done that at Tulane, started the college program in the women's prison, and then I got to start a second program in a men's prison in Louisiana over the past year. And so that was, clearly like kind of the through line since I was 19 years old has been education in prison. And so that's kind of how I see my vocation.
Yeah. Why is education so important, especially for those who are incarcerated? Because I think people listening in or watching might be like, why? Like, people are in prison. Why should we educate them?
Right. I think there's a lot of arguments around benefit to society and reducing recidivism, and there's people, really the truth is if you put people in a prison and you don't do anything positive for them, they come home and they have no more opportunity, even less opportunity than they had when they went in, and that's not what we should want as a society and as a community. But I think on an individual level, which is the level that I care about the most, I've seen the transformative impacts for people when they for any of us, when you think about anyone who has benefited from education, what that does for your self-esteem, what that does for your sense of purpose, what that does for you to think of yourself as a person who is capable, who's worthy, who can accomplish things, who's a part of a community that's working towards goals. I think the intangible kind of, aside from all the positive, I can drown you in statistics, but I won't do that. Like, I think really what I care about is the transformative power of education for individuals, and particularly for individuals who may be experiencing the worst moments of their lives in the worst conditions that they've ever been in. That's something that we should all hope for anybody.
And ultimately, I think it's about those individuals and their transformation, and that the transformation of our society actually is going to be impacted by their being transformed too.
These are brilliant human beings who have things to contribute to the world if given the opportunity to do so. I've learned so many things from people in prison who have so much that they could do. I mean, Sarita Steib, who I founded the nonprofit with, she'd spent time in prison, and she, I think about 12 years, and she's come out and she's written and passed laws. She's changed systems. There's so many stories of so many people who, got access to education, then were able to see what they could contribute, what they could do, whether that's run a business or do policy work, or even just like provide for their families and be able to be a present father or mother. Like, that's another way to impact society on an individual level. And so I think, I also think that there's no significant difference between me and someone in prison other than the context and opportunities and situations that they've been put in. And so I was really disillusioned in college about there being like some marked difference, like good and bad people, right? There's not good and bad people. There's just situations and then what we do in those situations. And so seeing those women in prison, knowing that we had mutual friends and connections, made me really feel like I just had like a lot of opportunities along the way that other people didn't have. And so, yeah, for the grace of God.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, and I think I always go back to that line from Brian Stevenson, that all of us are more than the worst thing we've ever done.
Right.
And so often, certainly the folks I work with here at Belize Central, and I'm sure, you've encountered this too, or maybe you have, I don't want to assume, but so many people feel so weighed down by the fact that they are marked for what they have done. They are a murderer, they are a rape, whatever the title is. And to be able to get beyond that, beyond the shame that is so like deeply rooted, and to see that part. And I think what you were saying about education is one way of getting out from under that shame.
And you know what I've learned in the past year from the Jesuits, really, is that, I'm doing the spiritual exercise 19th annotation. So it's, 30 weeks as opposed to 30 days, an hour a day. Is that God wants us to know ourselves and see ourselves the way that he sees us. And that grace, like kind of removing that shame, is a beautiful thing that I want for everyone, what that has meant to me has been life-changing over the past year. And so, and I think what I've seen, just a little bit of what that's done for our students in prison who are super, we're there, we're providing college courses, but we're, during orientation, during visits, we're able to talk about Ignatian spirituality. And, I want to do more of that because I think it really resonates.
Yeah, I think so too. One of the things I'm thinking about, a guy I was just with a couple of weeks ago, who we were talking about prayer, and he at one point I said, well, what does daily prayer look like? And he said, I focus on all the things I've done wrong today. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is just so not, that's not where God wants to be with us. And having him read just one of the Psalms and seeing his entire demeanor change, because the Psalm was Psalm 139, it was like, you search me and you know me. When I said, and he was like, God knows everything. Even, and just seeing the transformation, it's like, there's something about that. And I think that that's the role that faith can play as well. And the exercises, as you're saying,
right.
A huge piece. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work of JSRI and kind of, people are probably not super familiar with the Institute, even though we had Father Curran on to talk a little bit about JPEN and the Prison Education Network. But maybe just kind of what does JSRI do, and then what are the efforts looking like around prison education?
Sure. So the Jesuit Social Research Institute was started in 2007. Which in New Orleans context is really right after Hurricane Katrina and Rita. And the question was, what can, Jesuits do? What can Loyola New Orleans do to positively impact this community? And the thought was to create a research institute that would focus on race, poverty, and migration, which were three very important issues in that moment, and continue to be important issues. And so we've been around since then, and really the primary activity previously was doing these quarterly publications, monthly newsletters, uplifting different themes around race, poverty, and migration. And when Father Kammer, who was really the architect of JSRI, retired in 2021, the Jesuits and Loyola both rethought kind of what could JSRI do now that would be important to this context. And the thought was that we should focus on criminal legal system reform to accomplish our mission around race, poverty, and migration. And so that kind of transition happened. There was a faculty member who really was very interested, Dr. Marcus Konkar, in starting a prison education program at Loyola. And so this revisioning happened, and I think that's why they gave me the job, because I had very relevant experience. And I was kind of tasked with, in this first year, starting the prison education program as a kind of the primary goal, and then thinking what else could JSRI do around that. So, that's been most of our work this year, but we do have other work. We do Ignatian teach-ins on mass incarceration, where we bring formerly incarcerated speakers and we pay them an honorarium to share with our community in like a facilitated conversation in small groups around their experiences of incarceration. We have one of our fellows working at the district attorney's office in the Civil Rights Division, doing case reviews of everyone from Orleans Parish who served 20 years. In 2 years, they've gotten out 226 people, who majority of which had life without parole. So we're not coming home. And they were able to go back and look at their sentences and say, either did the DA do something wrong?
Yeah.
Is this person potentially innocent? Which that happened in many cases. Or what has the person done in the past 20 years? Should we maybe give them a chance? So that's been transformative. Just being a witness, that was going before I got there, and just being a witness to that work has been amazing.
Yeah.
And I also do some work around faculty formation, particularly around like community engagement, criminal legal system reform, and supporting their efforts. So that's really our focus. And it's a privilege to be able to dream in that setting, in that container, and think about like what else could JSRI do that's really accomplishing that mission so our mission is to transform the Gulf South through research, education, advocacy, and service on the issues of race, poverty, and migration.
Yeah.
And there's so much we can do.
Oh my gosh, yes. and maybe if you could talk a little bit about what the power behind advocacy is, because I think that's something that, certainly within like Catholic social teaching, we did an episode on that a few weeks ago. It doesn't get talked about all that much in the Catholic Church, and it's a huge part of our call to be people who put our faith into action. And so, like, what role or what's the power behind advocacy and the education needed to kind of do a good job of being a good advocate?
Yeah, so I have been privileged to work on a lot of policy issues. I've written, I think, 5 laws in Louisiana, and I've worked on federal legislation to restore the Pell Grant for people in prison.
Could you say a little bit about, because that's a huge deal, could you say a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so in 1994, the Pell Grant was taken away from people in prison through the Omnibus Crime Bill of 94, which basically there had been college programs in prisons. And then overnight, when the funding was gone, those programs closed. There's a documentary called The Last Graduation that documents the last graduation after that bill. And you can see them going in and taking the books out of prisons. And they interview people and they're like, the hope is gone, So that was devastating. And since 1994, people have been working to bring that back. And it's been a really long journey. I got involved really heavily in 2019 around what I mostly did was bring formerly incarcerated people to Washington, D.C. to speak to their legislators about the power of education, which, so in 2020, we were able to get that through on like a budget bill to restore the Pell Grant. And in 2023 is the first year that people are actually eligible.
Okay.
So we're kind of going through the rulemaking process, and that's been really complicated, but good. And all of these resources are about to come in. So we're hoping that means a lot more colleges have the resources to be able to serve people in prison, which is a huge deal because it's, there's a lot of kind of, like I said, documentation of how the culture shifted in prison when you remove education and the culture shift when you add education is a really positive move. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great example.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to advocacy.
Yeah.
I will say I had no formal training in how to do policy work. I showed up at the state capitol in Louisiana for like a lobbying day that a nonprofit had put together, and I'd never been in the building. And that first day, I found a legislator, Sarita and I found this legislator who wrote a bill to remove criminal history questions off college applications. And I was like, yes, like we need to do that. People need to get into college. And we approached him, but I had read it and I was like, I feel like this bill's not very well written. Not that I'd ever read a bill before. And I went up to him and I was like, can I ask you some questions about this? And he said, seems like you should just rewrite it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And so we did. We just sat at a kitchen table and we wrote a piece of legislation pulled at these other examples from other states and we wrote something. And then we brought these formerly incarcerated people to the Louisiana State Legislature and they testified and it passed unanimously. No one voted against it.
Which is huge.
Never happens in Louisiana.
Or probably most states for that matter. Yeah.
It was, and people were crying, like it was an emotional experience. And it wasn't, I did a whole research study and it wasn't because of my research study, it was because of these personal experiences of transformation. Legislators, we're very conservative legislators. We have a super majority of Republican conservative folks in Louisiana in the legislature who never vote for things like this. Voted for it. And after that experience, I was like, yeah, this is it. Like, we got to do this over and over and over again because this is like that legislation will impact thousands of people. And so that's kind of, I think, the move. And so I think people think that they can't do policy because they don't have like a degree in it or they don't know anything about it. But on the local and the state level, there's so much change that you can do just by showing up and being a witness to testify to your own experience related to an issue or to support others. Because it's really just people up there making decisions based on the information that they have. And if you can give them good information or a reason to care about something, then that's how we change laws. Which is really important. And it's also how we prevent bad laws from being made, which is something we're fighting with, you know? So I would hope that a lot more people see themselves as capable of being involved in advocacy.
Yes. And I think, what I'm hearing there, which is so important, is like, it is about the mind and getting good information, but it's about also touching hearts, And that like telling your story, sharing your experience is so important. And I think here in Belize, I think there are a lot of stories that remain untold, whether that's with regards to incarceration or a whole host of other issues, which we could do a whole list of. But I think just demonstrating that the political system, at least in the US, with all of its imperfections, can actually get something done. And that as people of faith, we can actually be part of pushing something through, gathering those voices, and kind of amplifying them. But that's just an incredible story.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Yeah, it was very transformative for me. And, somebody just asked me in the van, one of my colleagues, how do you change laws? And I said, it's 80% getting somebody to care about something. And the way you do that is you bring somebody who's directly impacted and you make that person care about this person. That's 80%. And then they'll ask, okay, what's the research on it? And you have to that has to be there. It has to be supportive. The numbers have to work, but it's 80% making somebody care about something,
Yeah. Well, and it's something like Ian and I talk about this all the time on the show. Pope Francis talks about building a culture of encounter.
Yes.
It is all about having those encounters because they do change us. And and that root word of encounter, it's not actually positive. It's usually breaking through kind of all of our preconceived notions, our prejudices, biases, whatever, and actually having a person.
And and in the education space, that's why going into prisons is so powerful and important for me, for my colleagues, for my students who are on the campus, because we don't see people in prison. We don't see prisons. They're in these remote areas. They're isolated. And so, I was writing a recommendation letter in the hotel for a student who's applying to law school because she took my class, she went into the women's prison, she cared about people, and that, again, caring about people. And that has stuck with her to the point where now she wants to go and be a lawyer to be able to have some impact on the system. And that I see that again and again is bringing people into prison and them having relationships and caring about people in prison. And whether that's you visited my class only went 3 times to the women's prison. It wasn't a lot of interaction for the students, but it stuck with her. You know? So I think that's why what you're doing too is so impactful, is trying to bridge that relationship between the college and the prison.
Definitely, and St. Martin's. We've got a group of lay folks now, about 5 or 6 people, and just watching them have experiences and being like, oh, I will be back.
Yeah.
There's something about that connection that really does. Right. Which leads me to our penultimate question, which, so we Jesuits and our lay partners in mission, we have this tagline, right, that comes from our documents in the 70s and it's been carried through ever since, about what our mission is, which is a faith that does justice. I was wondering, we've been kind of talking around this for the last few minutes, but what does that mission mean for you?
Yeah, I love this question. And I when I was applying to the job at GSRI, that phrase just resonated so strongly with me. Faith that does justice. And now that I'm kind of in it and learning more about the Jesuits and really getting to know Jesus more and his life and what he did, actually tangibly what he did and that we know about, it's that in every day and every minute and every decision we make, we have a choice about, how to treat people, how to show up in the world, how to utilize our gifts, and following our faith and following the example of Jesus. I think that we can make choices to treat people with dignity, with love, with respect, and to make the world better for all of us that are living in it. And we have everybody, people ask me what can I do to change these systems, or, when I go give presentations, and I say, what can you do? What is God calling you to do? Because it's not the same as what God is calling me to do. It's not the same as what God's calling you to do, right? But it's finding out what is my gift, what is my vocation, and how can I use that towards the mission of justice and making a more just world. And it's, so it's everybody, we need everybody. We need every single person.
Yes.
We need to care and to take steps, small steps, big steps, to make the world better. And so I think that that's what it is knowing yourself, seeing yourself the way God sees you, listening for that vision, and then proceeding in a way that makes the world better for all of us living in it. And that's what it means to me.
Yeah, that's
just
beautiful.
that, just that little.
Just that, no big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think what you're saying resonates so much. I often envision, that God is inviting us into this kind of grand work of kind of weaving a tapestry together.
Yeah.
And that we're all going to be working on different parts of it, but somehow God knows how.
Right.
Literally, it all actually does fit together.
Right.
And then I don't have to worry about the fact that I can't do 100 things.
Yeah.
I can do the thing that I feel most moved to do.
That's right. And when you let go of that control of
Yes.
I have to be a lawyer because that is the thing I have to do to make the world better, but it hurts and I don't want to do it, then you don't have to be a lawyer.
Exactly.
Don't be a lawyer, where is, what is the path that God's leading? Not that it's always easy, but it does always kind of, I feel, unfold in a way that makes a lot of sense and that there is ease in that, know? And sometimes it's really, when God called me to quit my job with a 1-year-old child, I was like, this does not feel good. This doesn't feel right. But I know this is what I have to do for whatever reason. I knew, and I didn't know this job was coming. I didn't know what was coming next. But I'm so grateful that, and then this job came up and 6 people sent me the job posting and said, this is you. I don't know. This is your exact position.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, but I think there's an ease to when you're following kind of and listening and praying and being paying attention to yourself.
Yeah.
It's really, it's a good thing to do. But anyway, we can keep going.
We could, yeah. No, and just to say, in the, Jesuit network, that, and just listening, people are very excited about the work you're doing.
Oh,
and so thank you. Thank you for saying yes.
Yeah.
Because I think it's already having a huge impact.
Thank you.
And will continue to. So. Yeah,
I'm so grateful. I want to do this job I want to do this job until I can't do this job anymore, I feel just so good about where I'm at and the people I get to work with and the things I get to do. My dean jokes with me and she's always like, still the best job ever? And I'm like, still the best job ever. Every day, still the best job ever.
Yeah.
But that's how I feel. I just feel so enthusiastic. And then to be able to come here to Belize and to see what the Jesuits are doing here, to see the real deep connections with New Orleans. This is not something I ever would have thought that I would have the experience of, and I love it.
Well, that leads very well into our last question, which I'll answer too. You've had a slightly shorter time here to answer this, but I'll rephrase the question a little bit, because originally it was, what's your favorite part of Belize? But I'll rephrase that. I don't like the kind of pick your top. What's one of your favorite things or places, people, whatever, that you've encountered so far in Belize?
This was hard, but we went to Gales Point, Manatee, which is a Maroon community, which I knew nothing about really, but a Maroon community in the Caribbean is when basically runaway slaves, people who were enslaved, who found their own community and build that place. And so I felt very honored to be there, to have somebody from that community tell me the story of the community and how it was founded and how it's grown and how they have survived with little support from the government until very, very recently, and just kind of supported each other and the challenges that they face, but also the joy that they have and the love and the pride that they have in their community. Was really beautiful and inspiring. And also just the legacy of slavery. I've just read Chris Kellerman's book, All Oppression Shall Cease.
I'm currently reading it, yeah.
And, the Catholic Church's role in slavery. Louisiana, the legacy of slavery is thick. It's, in the air. And so that, I felt like that connection really just moved by. And so I think that place will stick with me very deeply. But there's so many other places and so many other people and so much food, so much good food. But yeah, I just feel really privileged to have had that opportunity. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it was really impactful.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks for sharing a little bit about it. This is an impossible question, right? But I'll just pick a place just because I was there around this time last year around Holy Week, which is San Antonio Village down in Toledo District. And getting to spend a very small amount of time with that community, being part of a procession on Good Friday of hauling a 600-pound cross up a hill and doing the Stations of the Cross along the way. I did not do any of the hauling. Jason Britch, one of the novices, Jesuit novices, helped with it. But just seeing it was so moving to see this community of people who work really hard, who are doing, in a lot of cases, are subsistence farmers, but took the day off and wanted to celebrate who Jesus is and what his sacrifice means by going up this hill. And just, I don't know, I'm always moved, or I've always been moved by processions, because I think they just, it reminds me of a quote that I'll adapt a little bit because it has a bad word in it, but it's from a Jesuit, Dan Berrigan, who says, faith isn't about where your head's at, it's not where your heart's at, it's where your rear end's at. And I think the processions are all about that. They show, it's where we put ourselves. Where do you put yourself? I don't know, I think of San Antonio, just this community that I'm grateful to have spent just a little bit of time with and would love to go back at some point. So. Anyway.
So many good things.
So many good things.
Yeah.
So, well, we hope that you have enjoyed our conversation, and lots of really good things in our conversation. So thanks, Annie, for being here.
Thank you.
I know that we literally had to steal her away from what she was doing. So thank you for letting us do that. Yeah. And as always, for those of you listening or watching at home, if you have any comments, if you have anything that you would like for us to talk about. As Ian mentioned last time, our time here is running short in Belize. We'll probably be leaving end of May, early June. So if you have any ideas for episodes, we do welcome those, and we still have some episodes to fill still. So if you have any ideas, send those in. But until next time, we'll see you.